There's trouble on Capitol Hill. A United States senator has criticized the Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, for censoring a report into its torture methods. The Senate Intelligence Committee conducted a 5-year investigation into the CIA's torture program, a program itself initiated as a direct result of the attacks in New York on September the 11th, 2001. The United States has been quick to criticize other countries for their human rights records. But who can forget that America itself opened Guantanamo Bay to detain alleged terror suspects without any fair trial. Indeed, America based Guantanamo in Cuba to sidestep its own human rights laws. Now, the US is in the news again for its appalling human rights abuses of detainees, including force feeding. American soldiers have also been found guilty of torturing Afghans and Iraqis. America's occupying forces have scored own goal after own goal, with the Iraqi Abu Ghraib prison a case study in torture. American inconsistencies on human rights have been a recruiting sergeant for terrorism. Their actions have created the very circumstances necessary for violence to flourish. So, how do the American people feel about the use of torture in, say, Guantanamo Bay? What impact has torture had on America's international reputation? And has torture increased the terrorist threat against American citizens? These are the simple questions we sought to answer. And we began by asking the American public which countries they considered guilty of using torture. Here's what they thought.
Well, I'm afraid that the U.S. uses torture tactics. Probably North Korea, possibly China.
America, North America, North Korea, and somewhere in the Middle East, like with ISIS and all that.
Definitely North Korea, a lot of countries in the Middle East. I know a lot of African countries that are warring currently, like civil war countries, are definitely using it.
Which countries? I don't know. I'm not sure that I would be able to answer that torture.
From as far as what I watch on the news and things that I've seen on the internet, I've heard Turkey, Uganda, North Korea, Iraq.
I guess to a certain extent, United States.
I think all countries at some point have probably used some form of torture tactics during wartime.
I feel America's a big one. I feel that like the Middle East is one of them too.
It'd be like a lot of third world countries, mostly, yeah.
America. Whatever country ISIS is in, probably. Wherever they are. I can't say much else because I don't want to assume anything. So
Definitely the United States.
So, which countries are identified with torture? We invited our experts to share the facts.
Unfortunately, torture is flourishing almost all the countries of the world. The government and the powerful group use torture against innocent people. When the government use torture against or treat their people with the inhuman ways, they say, oh, that was the national security issue. So Africa, Asia, even America is using the torture techniques and is using.
Well, I suspect, unfortunately, if we started off on a list of countries that have abused and broken their responsibilities under the UN Convention Against Torture, it would be an extensive one. But you know, broadly speaking, I don't think there's a corner of the world where people aren't breaking their obligations. I think, you know, look at every continent and we're going to see that there are certain problems. I think the problem with the United States being a country that semi-officially introduced a torture program, you know, as a government program after the 9/11 attacks, is that the United States is in a position to claim a kind of moral leadership and to suggest that it shows this kind of moral leadership to the world. Now, obviously, you know, throughout America's history, that's been fraught with various forms of hypocrisy, sometimes absolutely massive hypocrisy. But I think we're in an era of massive hypocrisy on the part of the United States. claiming to uphold values while fundamentally undermining one of the most important civilizing values developed in the post-war years. You know, the consensus of nations after the Second World War that we need to put things in place to try and make us behave better. And I think the UN Convention Against Torture is really a key part of that. So anyone that breaks that is sending a terrible message.
Force feeding is something which has caused great controversy, yet the Americans have used this method in Guantanamo Bay. We asked the American public how they felt about the use of this technique and about torture generally. Here's what they said.
I mean, it's like the same thing as torturing them, I guess, because it's forcing someone to do what they don't want to do. It's their decision, and then they're in prison, so, I mean, they don't technically own that person, so they have the right to do what they want, I guess.
I feel that's wrong. If the prisoners don't want to eat, or that's up to them, because they're in Guantanamo Bay for a reason. They've either committed a crime or they've done something that's wrong, that they shouldn't be in public, and that's why they ended up there. So if they want to die in Guantanamo Bay, they're allowed to.
I mean, I understand that it might be necessary to get the information. Is it morally wrong? Yes. But I mean, you know, it's one of those things, it's not like a right or wrong answer necessarily, so.
No, I don't feel good about that.
I feel that that's not right and they should close Guantanamo Bay down.
I mean, I don't really approve of it, but at the same time, I mean, there's not much you can do.
I think they use a lot of different forms of torture at Guantanamo Bay, and I personally don't see a problem with most of them, because most of them lead to intelligence that helps our country ward threats.
I think that when it comes to situations with terrorism and all that, with the prisoners in Guantanamo Bay, it may come to points where torture is necessary, is a means to an end. But I don't know, it's one of those more difficult topics.
I don't like torture against people is I'm so against it, and I think it's really bad. Like, they shouldn't be tortured at all.
I don't agree with the torture tactics, even for suspected terrorists. If we use torture, it's not really that different from what they do. I wouldn't agree with that. And force feeding, I don't really know how I feel about that. If they're intentionally starving themselves, you know, I kind of feel like you have to step in at some point, but at the same time, I guess they are allowed to starve themselves if they want. You know, what right do we have to force feed them?
We put the same question to our experts.
Torture in any shape is very bad. Isolation detention, sleepless nights, they don't let them sleep for hours and days, to break them. Sometimes they don't feed them, they don't give them enough food. Sometimes they take different ways, different waterboarding and all these things. But forcefully feeding somebody, again, because they don't want to eat, they don't want to chew, so they use the other methods, maybe the pipe or something which is inhuman, which should not be.
Well, you know, Guantanamo has had a threefold torture problem from the beginning, essentially. In the early days, we actually had an official torture program at Guantanamo, which was only really came to an end when it became apparent that the Supreme Court was going to grant habeas corpus rights to the prisoners in June 2004, which then allowed lawyers in to break the veil of secrecy that had allowed them to do whatever the hell they wanted there, because nobody was watching. And they actually did have a torture program. A lot of the things we've heard across the board in the war on terror of the abuse of prisoners, so the isolation, the sexual humiliation, the forced nudity, the extremely loud music, the use of white noise, painful shackling positions, the extreme heat and extreme cold. All of these things were official policy for a while. Then there's always been this problem with the hunger strikers at Guantanamo, and there have been hunger strikes from the very beginning. But the hunger strike in the summer of 2005, which was massive, I mean, this one involved, I think, at least 200 of the prisoners who were there at the time. And by January 2006, the authorities were really trying to bring this to an end as forcefully as possible, which was the first time that they imported the restraint chairs. So that's where the people are, fastened in multiple places and force-fed. And the restraint chairs were really the ones that enabled them to break that strike. I think subsequently, it's easy to see how horrible and brutal it is every time that they're force-feeding people in this manner. And I think that it is absolutely fair to say, as medical experts have, that that absolutely it's abusive and that it could be perceived as torture.
What impact does the use of torture have on America's reputation internationally? One would imagine that everyone's got an opinion on this question. We invited the public in America to give us theirs.
It makes us look like bad guys, I guess, depending on who the person is looking at us, because if someone's in jail, they're in jail, that's bad enough. You don't have to, like, cut their fingers off or waterboard them or anything. It's just taking it to a whole new level. That's crossing the line, in my opinion.
I mean, as an American, it's hard for me to say what other people think of us, but I think a lot of other countries benefit from what we do around the world.
I think it has a pretty negative reputation, but we are like the #1 superpower, so we are going to have enemies and things like that. So we do need to kind of go a bit farther in our defense and all that.
Once again, I mean, I think there's other countries doing it, so compared to them, we're probably not as bad. But it's definitely, I feel like in other countries, it's definitely a topic where they see America as we're getting away with it compared to other places.
I would think that it compromised the United States with, in the eyes of the rest of the world.
I'd say negative, but America's reputation is already pretty negative around the world. I feel like it's probably not too far off from what other countries are doing. We're already known as being kind of careless and stuff like that. But I mean, it's just another knock against us, I'd say.
For us to use torture, like I said earlier, doesn't really make us any different than the terrorists. So I think that has a negative impact on our reputation around the world. I think we kind of have a reputation of getting involved like where we shouldn't, or not getting involved where we should. It's kind of a catch-22 there. But if we use torture, I feel like other countries would say, well, what makes you different from, anybody else?
I'm not really sure what other countries think about it, because I don't really know if other countries torture or not, but I would assume it's not very favorable.
So those are the views of the public. But has America's use of torture affected its international reputation? We asked our experts.
Oh, I think it's absolutely it's absolutely very damaging to have a reputation as, you can put inverted commas around it a bit, but a torture nation. That's what I think the United States became under the Bush administration. This was at the very highest levels that, the Bush administration planted John Yoo, the law professor from the University of California in Berkeley, who still has his job, into the highest level of the bureaucracy, where decisions are taken of advising the executive on what's legal and what's not legal. And in that position, he wrote memos saying torture isn't torture. Let's redefine torture so that we can approve torture for use by US forces. That's what he did. Obama has blocked every single opportunity for torture to be argued in a US court, for accountability to be called for. I imagine that he's been put under pressure significantly for that. But what happened at the highest level, was illegal from beginning to end, and there's been no accountability since.
With the West on high terrorist alert, do the public feel that the American use of torture has affected the level of terrorist threat against Americans in the United States and abroad? Is the public's view.
I do and I don't. I think more so the more involved we get in other countries' affairs, that increases the level of terrorism or the level of threats that we get. And I think if we were to go into a country and it came out that we were torturing suspects, especially not convicted, I think that would probably, inspire some people to threaten us with whatever act they might plan.
I don't think so. I don't think it contributes to it.
I don't think torture really negatively affects terrorists. Like, I don't think we have less terrorists because of torture. I think, if anything, we might have more terrorists because of torture.
I feel as though basically the media only tells us what they want to tell us. At the end of the day, we're not the president, so we don't know exactly what's going on. And I'm pretty sure there's a lot of things that they contain that doesn't get out to the public. So, but as far as what I've seen that has reached the public, it has gone down a lot. So I think that it has been a pretty good impact, that where so people are understanding, we're not zero tolerance, period.
Definitely, yes. I think the use of torture tactics, which most aren't even long-term harmful to people, have had a very positive impact on the level of defense our country's been able to provide us.
Definitely, yeah. If we probably hadn't used it on people in Guantanamo Bay, other countries wouldn't have retaliated so heavily.
Sorta. I guess that's one reason why some people will really look down upon us.
I mean, I don't really think so, because especially some of the terrorists against the U.S., they're not really concerned with that kind of stuff. So I don't think it deters that much.
I'm not sure. It probably just depends on who's being tortured. I mean, if it's someone of a different religion, I guess, then other people will find that offensive, and it'll make them really mad and make them act out drastically against the United States.
So perhaps the linkage between torture and terrorism is turning out to be an inconvenient truth. We asked our experts for their perspective.
My feeling about the United States is that there seems to be very little dangerous dissent from people within the United States. Most of the cases that seem to emerge are ones that have involved entrapment by the FBI. To that extent, I think America does a very good job of assimilating people to believe in America. Abroad, of course, is a completely different matter. Torture, rendition, the existence of Guantanamo, these are all issues that persistently inflame opposition to the United States. Both in a peaceful and a violent manner, and I think that that's understandable. That it would inflame tensions permanently, persistently. I also know that it's something that the Obama administration understands. Whenever President Obama delivers one of his wonderful speeches about Guantanamo, which he does every now and then, and never follows it through with the appropriate actions, he always makes a point of saying how Guantanamo, and I think we can include the torture in this, is somewhere that's creating enemies. It's making us less safe. So absolutely, it has a terrible effect for America's national security beyond the moral and ethical dimensions, which I think are something that should concern every decent human being.
We then asked the American public a sensitive but central question. What should America do about its use of torture?
I think they should definitely either stop it completely or just make it not as extreme as it is now.
I'm not aware that it's being that is a tactic that's being used now, and if it is, I think it needs to stop.
I think that it should continue, because at the end of the day, people live here, people live in China, people live in Russia, people live in many different continents, and as you being in a country, you want to feel safe, you want to feel, like you don't have to run out your back door wondering who's going to come for me and what's going to happen to me. So whatever they got to do to protect us, serve and protect, that's what they do.
I think they should continue doing whatever necessary to protect our people.
Get rid of it. I don't know because I know the government, this system is pretty messed up, so I don't know how much is it really going to have to take for us as society to actually change it.
I know they're not going to stop, so there's no point getting them to do that, but at least not make it as publicly available as it is, I guess.
America should act on it and have intervention groups for people who actually did torture people, or just arrest them and, I don't know, do something with them.
I feel like depending upon the crime is where they should draw the line. Like if they're just involved in a crime and they didn't actually do something, I feel like they shouldn't be penalized as heavy as the person that actually committed it.
I think it shouldn't be for everyone. If you are a thief or a repeat offender of drug abuse, giving you torture that is off, like there are levels of torture or something like that, or giving you a high level of torture that's not right. Giving you like a low level of punishment would be probably a good idea. Torture for low-level crimes they shouldn't be there. Maybe for high-level terrorists, yeah. But other than that, in my opinion, torture shouldn't exist in low-level prisons.
I think that we should try to find other ways to get the information we need and to expedite the charging of the suspects and their trials. I think it's kind of ludicrous for a prisoner to sit there for years without being charged, even if they're not a U.S. citizen. That is what our justice system is kind of built on, speedy trial, fair trial, and they should get the same. And if they're convicted, then they should be sentenced and imprisoned. But I don't know that torture is the right way to go about getting that verdict.
Our experts had very clear views about America's use of torture. Here's what they said.
America said that civilized country and democracy never allows anybody for torture or something. Inhuman treatment with people, degrading them, like torturing them, not letting them sleep is unacceptable. It's inhuman. America should stop it. The people of America, the people of the world, the citizen of a world, the world has become a global village now. The people and the global village citizen don't want to see the torture in any shape, not by the government, not by the superpowers, not by the groups, not by powerful people, not by anybody. There is torture. The torture leave a very, very bad effect on people.
We've seen this week the United States in Geneva addressing the UN Committee Against Torture, admitting that they crossed lines, swearing to uphold their obligations. There are grey areas. Obviously, we've spoken about some. Guantanamo, for example. I don't think that you can say you're upholding a ban against torture by keeping Guantanamo open. I really don't. What was highlighted at Geneva this week was Appendix M of the Army Field Manual, which is one that allows, under certain circumstances, to be decided by senior officials that you can implement a whole load of torture techniques in certain cases when you've apprehended people. Well, that shouldn't exist. So there are areas I think the direction it's going in, it would be churlish to say that America is not, for the most part, demonstrating a willingness to abide by its obligations. The main obligation that they're not following through on, it seems to me, is that you have an obligation to hold responsible people who implemented torture. Now, if you can't do that yourself, then you have an obligation to hand them over to somebody that will.
America has spent decades preaching to the world about human rights, and yet the United States itself has been willing to sponsor torture when that has assisted its goals. Washington wants to look better than the rest. But the sad fact is, a nation which does exactly what it condemns others for doing will be judged harshly by the world. That is the price America is doomed to pay for its double standards.